The Shark Deck.
Hello and welcome to Palace Intrigue. I am your host, Mark Francis. A rehearsal for the coronation took place in the wee hours of Wednesday morning. ITV reports hundreds of soldiers, many on horseback, marched down from Buckingham Palace past Trafalgar Square and Downing Street to Westminster Abbey on Wednesday morning. The Diamond Jubilee State Coach and Gold State Coach were marched down the Mall as part of the preparations for the full event on Saturday. The Diamond Jubilee State Coach, the newer of the two carriages, was accompanied by hundreds of soldiers on horseback as it travelled along the Mall, setting off shortly after 12:20 a.m. Wednesday. ITV adds that some royal fans waited for more than 3 hours for the parade to make a return journey down the Mall. Hundreds of soldiers from the military, Navy and RAF marched through central London before stopping along Whitehall and standing in silence. Many carried a wide range of instruments such as saxophones, trumpets, horns and cymbals, but only the drums were played by marching soldiers until they returned down the Mall after 3 a.m. The parade had begun when soldiers dressed in bright yellow uniforms began the short journey, and the brass band on horseback practiced as they accompanied the stage coach as it passed through Westminster. Onlookers skipped along next to the stagecoach and ran after regiments of mounted soldiers that followed. Soldiers from a wide variety of regiments marched down the Mall after 1 a.m. Buckingham Palace remained mostly silent, with soldiers quietly maintaining protocol until a regiment playing the bagpipes brought the area to life shortly after 2:30. The procession returned to Buckingham Palace shortly after 3 with bands in full swing. The Gold State Coach was spotted passing Buckingham Palace shortly after 3:20 a.m. The rehearsal took place hours after a man was arrested outside Buckingham Palace after throwing suspected shotgun cartridges into the palace grounds. The man was held on suspicion of possession of an offensive weapon after he was searched and a knife was found, but he was not carrying a gun. Cordons were put in place and Scotland Yard said the controlled explosion was carried out as a precaution as the man had a suspicious bag. Today, Kate and William will visit the Dog and Duck pub in Soho to hear how it's preparing for the Coronation weekend. The Wales will meet members of staff and representatives from other hospitality and recreation businesses in the area. Friend of the Sussexes, Omid Scobie, was on British TV and said that Meghan is protecting her peace as well. She is aware of how much the spotlight goes on her when she sets foot near the story. A lot of that, although is portrayed as intentional, that she wants to steal the spotlight, but in the case, if she had come over and simply stood next to her husband, I would imagine the commentary and the narrative on the day would be very different for the days that follow. Scobie imagines the royals are just fine that Meghan isn't coming. I would say so, and I would put it down to the fact that so much of the attention goes on someone they would rather didn't go on. If you look back at some of Meghan and Harry's biggest problems, it was all down to the fact that everyone was always talking about them and the attention was on them at times when it shouldn't have been. As for Harry, Scobie says, "This is the first time Harry has seen his family face-to-face since the release of Spare, but I don't think people know that there has been somewhat regular pattern of conversation between him and his father since the release of that book. Now they have discussed the details and the points that he wanted to go into. From what I hear, no, but he has had contact with his dad, and of course there have been some negative moments with the loss of Frogmore Cottage. They lose the keys to that any week now." He would have spoken to his father about that, but he also discussed his attendance at the coronation with his dad and made it clear he wanted to be a part of it, which I think was really well received. It's interesting to compare that where William and Harry are, which is in the exact same place as where we last saw them, there's been minimal contact since the funeral. Palace Intrigue will be right back. Hey, I'd like to tell you about a new sponsor of ours just in time for the coronation, and that's ExpressVPN. Now, ExpressVPN is an app you use when you're online that creates a secure encrypted tunnel between your device and the internet so hackers can't steal your data. It's something you should always be using when you go online in public places like cafes, hotels, airports, basically anywhere that's not your network. But there's something else that's really cool about using a VPN. Have you ever tried to watch TV from a foreign country and it says, "Sorry, this content is only available to users within that country"? Well, a VPN can give you access to almost every country in the world as if you were there. That means you can watch sporting events from around the world, local TV from another country, and here's the big thing, access to UK TV for the coronation. It's almost as good as being there. So all you do is fire up the app, go to your website of choice, and it's all there easy and quickly. ExpressVPN works on laptops, mobiles, any device. Secure your online data today and watch TV from around the world with ExpressVPN. Now go to expressvpn.com/palace and get 3 extra months free. That's expressvpn.com/palace, expressvpn.com/palace.
I'm Nina Hobson, ex-police detective from the UK. I've worked on every crime mentionable, from murder to kidnap to stalking to fraud. When I left the force, I launched my own investigations firm that soon became a global operation. I'm also a single mother of 2 to 2 members of my team, my son Harrison and daughter Amy. Every week, we'll be getting first-hand accounts from psychological experts, operatives, former criminals, actual victims of the crimes that we investigate, and of course, my very own flesh and blood. From Storic Media, you're listening to Codename Siren, a true crime podcast, available on YouTube and all major podcast platforms.
The coronation should be good for the local economy. CNN took a look at some numbers. Last year, grocery sales through the week of June 5th, the period that included celebrations for the late Queen Elizabeth's Platinum Jubilee, $108 million higher compared with the average week in 2022, according to Kantar data. As in June, UK retailers have come up with a vast array of mementos to mark Britain's first coronation in 70 years. From commemorative biscuit tins, teddy bears and tote bags to candles, cushions and teacups, the ceremony will take place in Westminster Abbey on May 6. Some items for sale include a life-size bust of King Charles made out of chocolates, Milky Way and Twix. Department store John Lewis has had to limit in-store purchases of its Coronation Lewis bear to 2 per household, and the teddy is out of stock online. Boodles, a family-owned jeweler, has launched a one-of-a-kind Coronation Gemini ring costing $496,000 and featuring 2 stones from the African mine that produced the Cullinan diamond, which is incorporated in the crown jewels. If you don't have $500,000 lying around, Deacon & Francis is selling a $425 sterling silver Coronation cufflink, and Hackett London is offering $92 Coronation pocket squares. Burger King customers in England can get a free Chicken Royal or Vegan Royal this coronation weekend when they purchase a Chicken Royal or Vegan Royal. Check your local BK for details. Stephen March, writing for The Guardian, says, viewed from Canada, the coronation is especially absurd, and the contradictions of Charles III perfectly suit the moment. For Canada, the absurdity of the coronation is basic. We are not a British colony, but we have a British king. This week, on his fancy carriage ride, Charles will be surrounded by many preposterous objects. He'll be holding the world's largest diamond on the end of a stick. He'll be wearing a hat with a ruby that Henry V wore into battle. He'll be sitting on a chair over the Stone of Destiny, a stone English kings stole from the Scots almost a millennium ago. The real absurdity will be deeper for both Canada and Britain. Charles is a symptom of twin identity crises. The man represents us, but it's hard to think of anyone less representative. I mean, it's all fun and games, but his face is going to be printed on my money. As someone who has spent several weeks for the purpose of this piece looking at everything you can put Charles' face on, tea towels, biscuit tins, trays, Christmas tree ornaments and mugs, I have learned that his face steers naturally towards caricature. It takes real skill and care not to make him look like a cartoon, even in photographs. The contradiction is apparent in Charles' face. Befuddlement in the midst of polish, excellent tailoring and superb manners combined with a palpable, almost painful diffidence. His face betrays a deep shyness, overcome at great difficulty. He lacks his mother's immense entitlement. Granny also knew how things ought to be done. Some of the how things ought to be done were small. One might eat asparagus with one's finger, but nothing else. Some of how things ought to be done were large. My grandfather had to go and bomb Germany for several years. Charles' face, in contrast, is far more human to me than the Queen's. The weak chin, the spaniel ears, the leonine hair. The sort of man you might dread being sat next to at a dinner party, but then turns out to be surprisingly pleasant. At first he drones on about his garden, indulging himself in a rant on a contemporary architecture, but then a couple of bottles in he tells you that he'd like to be reborn in the next life as a tampon. Meanwhile, in Scotland, the New York Times caught up with Lorna Slater, co-leader of the Scottish Green Party. Slater attended 3 official ceremonies honouring the death of Queen Elizabeth II, including her state funeral, but she won't be going to the coronation of King Charles III. Paying last respects to a widely revered queen was one thing, she said, even if the funeral seemed at times like a film set from Game of Thrones. But a lavish coronation ceremony for King Charles, Miss Slater said, is absolutely repellent when you have families who can't afford to feed their kids. The Times paints a rosier picture near Balmoral. Wendy Cobbin, who runs the Brakely gift room, said the royal family took an interest in the community and were vital to its economy. They keep us all in a job, let's face it, either working in Balmoral or the estates or those who benefit from the tourism that it attracts. Across the road at H.M. Sheridan's butcher, the co-owner, John Sinclair, was selling a commemorative Coronation sausage with pork, plums, ginger, and hoisin sauce. It's got a sweetness, but it's got a kick with the ginger at the end, so it's a nice sausage, said Mr. Sinclair, who supplies Balmoral Castle, has met many royals, including the King, and counts Princess Anne among his occasional customers. She's partial to a smoky pork sausage. And there you have it. If you'd like to email us, our address is thepalacintrigue@gmail.com. Please follow us on Spotify, iTunes, Google Podcasts, YouTube, or your favorite app of choice. I'm Mark Francis. My thanks to John McDermott. This is Palace Intrigue and good times.
Can I interest you in some meatballs made out of mammoth meat? No? All right, hi, I'm Johnny Mack, host of 5 Good News Stories. It's a twice-a-week podcast where I share some upbeat stories like the dog who only will respond to commands if you use an Irish brogue. Or what about the guy who's filling potholes with noodles? Or the woman who, congratulations, she passed her driver's license. Oh, by the way, it was her 960th try. You heard me correctly. It's 5 Good News Stories. Nice, easy way to start your morning. 5 Good News Stories. The number 5 Good News Stories, wherever you get your podcasts.